Okay, it should finally work. All right. Welcome everyone to a rather spontaneous live stream. I had actually planned to stream tomorrow, but for reasons, maybe I'm also going to do a stream tomorrow, but I wanted to start a day earlier. So welcome once again to a live stream here on Constan, and I hope you guys are doing well. Hope you're doing great. I think the weather in general in the Northern Hemisphere is getting rather warm. Where I live, it's really hot. Well, officially it was like 32 degrees today throughout the day, but it felt more like 40. And because it also hasn't rained in a long time, the atmosphere is really dry. So yeah, but let's see. The last few live streams, they were more or less successful. I mean, hundreds of people gathered and you asked many questions, and I mean, that's what matters to me. But I also saw that from live stream to live stream, more and more people tuned in. So I guess there's rising interest in these things. And as the title says, we're not necessarily going to do a Q&A this time, but of course you can at any time ask your questions about anything regarding Turkic and steppe history. But today I actually want to talk about a very specific topic that I've had in mind. Oh, wait a minute, that's my Steam account. No, we're not going to talk about gaming, but a very specific topic in Turkic history that I had in mind for a long time, and I think about which I made a video like 4 years ago or something, or 5 years ago. It even featured 3D animation, and that video or that topic is the rise of the second Göktürk Empire. And I've talked a lot about the Göktürks, I know, but most of the time I focus on the first Göktürk Empire, you know, of Bumin Khan, Istemi Khan, and so on, and how they managed to, you know, some steppe boys from the Altai with long braided hair, how they managed to build a massive empire that was the largest of its time, actually, you know, until that time, the largest state that had existed in known human history, and one that also managed to unite all of the Turkic and all of the steppe peoples under one banner. That had never happened before. And it's special. But the second Göktürk Empire's history might even be a bit more interesting because it's, you know, it's kind of like my microphone, it keeps falling off. Because the Second Empire had lots of problems. And the rulers of the Second Empire, people like Bilge Khan, of course, had lots of problems holding it together. And today or tonight, I want to just talk about why. What were the reasons? So that's the main topic of today. And again, as I said, for those tuning in now, slowly, welcome once again. And you can ask your questions anytime, of course. And unless I see some questions in the chat, which I have, you know, also like here in front of me on the monitor, I'm just gonna start slowly. Also, special hello and thank you for joining again, Tatiana. Really appreciate it. We could certainly talk about gaming, but I gotta tell you guys, I gotta tell you, Tatiana, I haven't been gaming or playing games in a long time, actually. If I play anything, it's like one of those super blockbuster games that like come once every 5 years, like Battlefield 6 was the one that I played a bit more than usual. Apart from that, you know, Europa Universalis, Crusader Kings, Age of Empires, like the kinds of games that a historian would want to invest his time in. But yeah, I wonder what you are playing, if at all. Okay, then sooner or later I will really figure out how to split the screens here in the stream. I am nothing but an amateur for now. I will just start though. I want to start with this map that I had made 2 years ago. No, 1 year ago. A bit more than 1 year ago. And this isn't like a fully colored map, as you can see, but I had only included like the most important states or most relevant states of the time into this map. And of course, this is where, you know, the music is playing. So this is what is interesting to us. And if you want to know why the Göktürk Empire got so fast so quickly, you have to take a look at the predecessor state, and that was of course the Wuran Khaganate. And the Wuran were not, as some people think, strictly 100% Mongolic people. They were not Turkic either, they were more like a mix. And they descended from the Xianbei. And from 402, a former slave freed himself, and he gathered a sort of military band, and with his companions he basically created his own little state. And also really nice, Tatiana, that you like MMOs. I used to play Star Wars The Old Republic. Like not Knights of the Old Republic, but the Old Republic with a friend of mine. I just had to invest too much time, so I gave up. But Age of Empires is really nice. Like Age of Empires 1, actually, for those who know, like that is where the fun really begins, like, with these pixelated graphics. But I digress. Back to the Wuran. The funny thing about the Wuran here is that they never reached actually as far as the Göktürks rather would. So their territory was very large. It was almost as big as the Xiongnu Empire a few hundred years earlier, but they were mostly dominating the eastern steppe. Now, a few years later, this is 546, the Göktürk rebellion starts, and a few years later, we have this. The Göktürk Empire that is almost as big immediately as the Wuran Empire. How did they make it or manage that? Well, they basically defeated the Wuran. They entered Ötüken, the sacred city, or rather the sacred forest, which was the power base of the Wuran and many others before them. And by doing so, they immediately gained control of the surrounding areas and of the tribes that had pledged allegiance to those people or to that dynasty who is controlling Ötüken. So the Wuran were, well, they were basically stripped of all of their titles. They actually fled. Here, maybe we can make the map a bit bigger. You can see here a small remnant of the Wuran to the, well, to the very east of modern-day Mongolia. And they were actually settled there by the northern Kui Emperor Wenxuan. Wenxuan was also an alcoholic, but I'm sure that's not relevant at all for our history. And Wenxuan actually felt threatened by the Göktürks, and he told the Wuran remnants, the surviving sons, the successors of Anagui Khan, who had, well, taken his life before Bumin could even fight him personally. And Wenxuan promised them land and said, sure, you can like even settle a bit further south up to Mayi, but you've got to fight for me against the Göktürks. It was also Wenxuan at that time who actually rebuilt thousands of kilometers of the old Chinese wall exactly along this border, because he feared that the Göktürks would like try to overrun him, overrun his empire. That never happened, but what the Göktürks did was, yeah, they crushed the Wuran. A few of them survived and then went to the Western Way. They sought for asylum, and it was like, I think, 3,000 Wuran remnants, like men, women, also children and elderly people, like the surviving part of the ruling clan. And at that time, Mukan Khan was already ruling over the Göktürk Empire. And what he did was, he arrived at the Yellow River and the Western Way. They were allied with the Göktürks. And he said, you can hand me over all of the Wuran, or we can do it the hard way. And the Western Way, of course, agreed, because they also felt threatened in a way. And that's why 3,000 Wuran people, I assume, indeed, men and women, I hope not children, but Wuran people were executed, not on the spot, but at the border. 3,000. That's what the Chinese themselves write. And from that point on, the Wuran were basically gone. They were history. So now, the Göktürks can take care of Western affairs. But as you should know, the Göktürks had like a dual kingship or a system of dual rulers. Mukan by that time was taking care of the East, but the West, which had not been conquered yet, would be taken care of by Istemi. And now I will go to the next map, meanwhile trying to also take care of some of the questions. And of course, you can see, like, this is from 560 to 581. Of course, the borders are fluctuating. And as always with steppe empires, or hell, with historical states in general, they never really fix, right? So this is like the approximate territory ruled by the Göktürk dynasty. Doesn't mean that it's like 100% right. It's really difficult to make out. And I have actually put all of these tribes and peoples that the Göktürks themselves mentioned in the author inscription, but of which we also know that they existed from other sources. I put them into this yellow, pointed at them by inserting some yellow text, and you can see that they ruled over all of the Turkic tribes, the Mongolic tribes in the east, up to the west. They most likely, the Magyars, which we talked about briefly last time, they were also living under Göktürk rulership. I mean, they were also steppe people, so they weren't really that foreign, apart from the language. And there was also the Onogur, which I also mentioned last time. The Onogur were some of the remnants of the Hunnic Empire, some of them, that had stayed to the east. And all of this in blue, including the White Huns here in Afghanistan, parts of Afghanistan, they were either under direct rule or they were vassals of the Göktürks. So within a few years, thanks to Istemi, the Ashina state expanded massively, like rapidly and massively. But we all know how it turned out in the end. And by 650, or rather, excuse me, by around, from 620 to 630, the situation was as here. We had an Eastern Khaganate and a Western Khaganate. How can that be? Even to try to make, put a little line in there separating them. Why? Now you can see at the map that within the few decades, some things changed. Like we don't have the Wei and the Kui and other dynasties, but the Tang dynasty. In China, they had united China actually, and they had big ambitions. And the Göktürks always had big ambitions, but they had just ended a civil war in which several Göktürk princes had fought for ownership of the throne. Because the last great Göktürk Khan, who had really held all of the Khaganate together, Taspar, he died in 581, and just before he died, he designated his own successor, which should have been his son, but it was not, it was his nephew actually. And, well, I guess his nephew he saw the nephew as the most capable ruling. But the others, so the sons of Kara Khan, Mukan Khan, and even the son of Istemi, they did not accept this. So there was a little revolt in the Big Toy. The Toy was the National Assembly of the Old Turks in Ötüken, so here in the east, in the Orhan Valley somewhere. And there was a big argument, political argument that turned into a civil war where two princes fought against two other princes, and I won't go too much into detail there, but it was basically those commanding armies west of the Altai versus those commanding armies east of the Altai. And from that point on, the Göktürk Empire was never the same. It split in around 584. There was a very brief reunification in 603, but that also failed. And then the successors at both sides decided to go separate ways. From that moment on, the Western Göktürks were completely independent from the Eastern Göktürks. And while Istemi was still ruling, that was not the case formally. Well, but it's still a lot of territory, right? They are still mighty, they are still big. And there's even a story of the last Western Khan, Tongyapgu, going all the way, marching all the way into Georgia, where he meet the Byzantine Emperor Heraclius personally, where, during a siege, I think of Tbilisi, so of Tiflis, and Heraclius and Tongyapgu met at the camp, and they exchanged brotherly and gave each other gifts and promised to fight together. And the siege was successful. There was another battle nearby. The Turks and the Byzantines won, and who was the common enemy, you might ask? It was the Sasanian Empire. At the same time, there were also Göktürk forces invading from the east, so from the actual border, from Sogdia, through the Karakum, Kızılkum deserts into Iran. But Tongyapku was suddenly murdered. You know, he was on his way back home. He said, okay, the armies are going to take care of this. I can go back to my home base, which would be in Sogdia. There he was murdered. And there was now another succession crisis, this time in the Western Khaganate. And at the same time, simultaneously, in the east, there was also a big Göktürk Khan who was rather successful, and he was called Ilik. And Ilik had just managed to go as far as Chang'an, and he was almost he was almost about to completely destroy the Tang dynasty, because he could have perhaps ambushed the Tang emperor at that time, Taizong, but he didn't. He failed, and he was not captured. Taizong instead had a dinner with him, basically. They exchanged gifts, and then Ilik promised Taizong not to attack again, and he went back with his army of a few thousand Göktürk warriors back to the steppe. That was a big mistake, because once he arrived back home, suddenly some of the larger tribes started to rebel against his rule. They were not happy with some of the political decisions he had made. And at the same time, surprisingly, the Tang Emperor Taizong orders his armies to attack the Göktürks. So Ilik Khan is being attacked both from within and from outside. And spoiler, he loses. He's been captured, actually. He's brought to Chang'an, to the capital of the Tang Empire, and he stayed there for a few years, I think for like 2 years, and then he died. He was treated well by Taizong, but he had been humiliated and he had lost all of his power. So can you guess what happened around 640 AD? Of course, the Eastern Khaganate was attacked, invaded, and conquered by Tang China. Now, the Chinese never really had the ambition to conquer the steppe. What they did instead, I can show you on this not complete map, but covering most of the important things. What happened instead was that the Western Göktürks, they also split into 10 tribes, which were still able to hold the realm together somehow. But the Eastern Göktürks, the empire vanished completely. And the Sui dynasty took hold of parts of the Tarim Basin, for example, like these city-states here, right? Up to the near the Tarim Basin. And they would actually go on to conquer the Tarim Basin as well. But in the north, the Sultadush, which are also known as the Shuoyantuo in Chinese sources, they were made the new rulers of the Eastern Steppe. And Taizong was so powerful that he really could decide and say, okay, you know what, this tribe who fought with us and for us against the Göktürks, we are going to reward them. Make their tribal chief the new Khan. And suddenly the Sultadush were ruling over Ötekin. Now, they never got as big as the Göktürks, and a few years later, the Tang Chinese also turned against them for different reasons, so they also vanished, but they had done the job. The Göktürks were no more. At the same time, the Altai Mountains, which was sort of like the home base, or in general the home of the Ashina dynasty, had also been captured by the Dokuz Oghuz, or Dokuz Oğuz in modern Turkish, which just means the 9 tribes. I had also mentioned them last time, and one of these 9 tribes we know as the Huihe, which is the Chinese term for the Uyghurs. Yeah, so the Uyghurs, among others, had captured the Altai. They had also fought against the Göktürks. They had really betrayed them from the inside. So it's not looking good for the Turkic world currently, but you could still say, well, it's just that one Turkic dynasty was toppled and others took over, and yeah, the Chinese helped them, but still, Turks rule over Turks, so happened a lot in history, right? I would tend to agree, but there was just one problem. Because the Ashina Turks did not simply disappear. They were still there, they were still alive, but they were being kept in held in captivity, and it was in the Ordos Plateau. The Chinese had settled thousands of Ashina Turks, men, women, children, elderly people, with their yurts in the Ordos Plateau and, to the Gobi Desert, and they had kept them there. And the only goal was, or like the goal of this was to keep them there so that the Ashina Turks could not possibly someday try to break out and return to the steppe and topple the other Turkic rulers and create a new empire again, because they were simply too powerful. But the problem is that it didn't work. Like for 50 years, and that's also what the Orkhon inscriptions say, for 50 years, the Turks were, or the Göktürks were in the service of the Chinese. It's true that several Turkish or Turkic Göktürk generals, they switched sides. They fought for the Chinese in the names of the Chinese, for example, conquering the Tarim Basin for them. So all of these cities fell to Chinese hands because capable Göktürk warriors and generals fought in the name of the emperor. They were rewarded with a lot of gold and titles and, women, of course. All they had to do is stay in Chang'an, be loyal to the Chinese emperor, and every now and then fight for him. They also did this against the Koreans, against the Goguryeo, which really was treason of the biggest form, because the Goguryeo and the Turks, like I had mentioned or written in an article that I'd mentioned last time, they used to be together. They used to be allies against the Chinese. And suddenly, and you can Google, the many Chinese invasions of the Korean Peninsula. Most of them failed, and the last one was really successful. You can really look it up. Like, there were hundreds and thousands of soldiers fighting on both sides, but Göktürk generals were fighting on the Chinese side, and there was not a single Turk fighting on the Korean side. From that moment on, the relationship between Turks and Koreans kind of broke off for a while. And of course, there were also Ashina Turks who were not happy with that at all. Like, they didn't want this. And the most importantly, they wanted to be politically independent again, right? That was the most important thing. Like, there are three things that were really important for old Turks. The first was freedom. Freedom to roam around and fight and live as much as you want. The second thing was to live in a stable society. Even if you're like a free thinker and you want to live or like go on adventures and ride around the steppe and also become a great warrior, when you go back home, you want to go back to your family. You want to be in a stable, you want your family to be in a stable condition, and you want to live with other families too. So whatever your tribe is, but no matter how big it is, you want it to be stable and ordered, and with everyone taking or respecting the law, the Turk töre. That was important. The third thing that was important was to tolerate foreign cultures without being overrun by them. You don't want a foreign culture to rule over you. That wouldn't make sense. Then you could like get assimilated, and then you would stop, you would cease to be a Turk. And that can't be, so you have to fight against that. And that is exactly what the Chinese in part tried to accomplish. So in 631, a man called Kutluk decides to rebel. He decides to revolt against the Chinese rule, and he takes a few dozen of his Ashina relatives, of warriors, also some of them older, some even who had fought for the first Göktürk Empire, who are advising him, consulting him, etc. He takes them, and he actually goes to the hinterlands of the steppe, hides there, and the Chinese are like, they have activated Red Alert, and even though it's just a few hundred people trying to break out and not directly fight the Chinese, they try to stop them and capture them and bring them back. So they send their armies, but to put it shortly, the Chinese fail because Kutluk does not want to confront them directly, because he knows against 100,000 Chinese he wouldn't have any chance. Instead, he ambushes them every now and then. Hit and run tactics, like the Mongols used them a lot of the time, in the 13th, 14th century. He did just that while hiding in the Yin Mountains. And eventually the other Ashina Turks also break out and they follow him. And Kutluk then proclaims in 682 a new state, the new Göktürk Khaganate. And this is basically the birth of the second Göktürk Khaganate. And I will show you just a map that should emphasize one thing, that the second Göktürk Empire never got as big as the first one. But Kutluk did not even live long enough to see all of this. What he did was enable the breakout of the Ashina Turks from Chinese captivity, give them motivation, give them hope, restore their honor and dignity in a certain way, and then his brother Kapgan took care of the rest and conquered the areas to the west of the Orhan River or Orhan Valley, including the Altai. And it's also written in the Orhan inscriptions, this new generation of Göktürk warriors, they fought everyone. Now, Kutluk himself was involved in up to 17 battles against the Chinese, right? He was also fighting the Uyghurs to take back the Altai. And then his brother, after he had taken over in 692, he was fighting the Kyrgyz and the Sayan Mountains. And then he was going even further with his good friend Tonyukuk and his nephews, Kültegin and Bilge, so the two sons of Kutluk actually, of Kutluk Iltadış, and they were fighting against these newer Turkic states, which had developed without any Ashina Turk influence. And what was the goal here? Like, what did they want to accomplish? They basically wanted to restore the glory of the First Empire. That's all. They couldn't do it, though. Like, this was the big, I mean, it was still a big state, but the Second Göktürk Empire never managed to do what the first had done, and that's to unite all of the steppe and all of the Turkic peoples. It wasn't possible this time. And when you take a good look at the map to the west, maybe you have spotted them. There are two more Turkic states that had emerged after the fall of the First Empire. First one is the Bulgar Empire, and I know there's going to be some controversy here again, but the fact of the matter is that the first Bulgars who came in from the steppe spoke Turkic, spoke the same Turkic as the Huns. They just came in a bit later. You have the Avar Khaganate, which shouldn't exist because, or was not allowed to exist because using the Kagan or the Khan title without ruling over Ötekin was forbidden back in the day. But the Avars, some of them who had also been part of the run, were being chased away from the Gökturks of Bumen and Istemi. They arrived in Europe, they mixed with other peoples, with other steppe peoples, they created their own Khaganate. And that was the first time where you had basically two Khans existing at the same time. And then the other states, Turkic states, did the same. The Bulgars had a Khan, the Khazars had a Khan, the Kangas had a Khan, the Turgesh, everyone was a Khan now. And this must have made like the actual Gökturks ruling over Ötekin like go crazy. They couldn't accept that. And they basically wanted to restore the glory of their ancestors, but also they wanted to unite the steppe once again. And they failed. And the reason for that is the Ashina Turks were in Chinese captivity for 50 years. And they had no control over what was happening in the steppe. Certainly not what was happening in the West, and they probably did not even have knowledge of all the other new Turkic subgroups emerging and doing their own thing. And now suddenly they arrive after such a long time, and the peoples here in the West, like Turgesh and the Kangar, or also the Oghuz, they knew the Ashina Turks. Well, from legends. From these rulers, these people ruling currently, they knew these Gökturks from the legends that their grandfathers would tell them at the campfire. And now they do arrive and they're real. It's crazy. So they do exist and they are back and they're strong. But where have they been like in the past 50 years? Like, where were you, Turks, Gökturks? Where were you when we were being attacked by the Arabs, for example? By the Umayyad Caliphate? Where were you when brother was fighting against brother and some of them fled further to the west like the Khazars did? Where were you when the Avars took all of the Hunnic peoples in Central Asia, took them with them to create something new on a continent called Europe. And where were you when the Chinese, with your Göktürk generals, were cleaning the Tarim Basin, killing off many Turkic warriors in the process? And that's the problem. So there was a dichotomy within the Turkic world between Eastern Turks and Western Turks. Second Göktürk Empire collapsed in 744, 745, and I would say the most important ruler of the Second Göktürk Empire was the founder himself, Kutluk Eltadiş Khan. But the most famous, of course, is Bilge Khan, who had erected a stele in the name of his mentor Tonyukuk, of his brother Kültegin, and eventually of himself, and with some very famous and wise words, which Turkish people, nationalist people also really like to use and recite. But Bilge Khan had a really tough job. Like, the guy was really tough, but all he did all of the time was fighting off Turkic tribes who rebelled against his rule all the time. He even says that, like, more than 50 times he was fighting off his own people. Like, you had a rebellion by the Kulik Khan in the east. Bilge Khan goes with his army, Quasi rebellion. Okay, then before this one ends, he hears something of the Dokuz Oğuz, of the Uyghurs. They want to rule again. And he comes here, acquires them. Then suddenly, the Mongols to the Chinese border? They also want a new state. They are being supported by the Chinese. Well, damn, now I also have to fight off the Chinese because they are intermingling into our affairs. And then something to the far west happens. Wait, what? The Arabs have arrived again? The other Turks, they want assistance? So it really had to be stressful. And the fact that Bilge Khan was able to rule for about 18 years as a Khan is a big wonder. But that's the reason why he couldn't expand anymore. Like, the Göktürk realm had was overextended, like in Europa Universalis. And then it fell. And then the Göktürks fought for the last time in 745. They lost. And once again, it had been a coalition of other Turkic peoples in unison with the Chinese emperor, fighting against the Göktürks from within. And this time, the Uyghurs, who had rebelled several times, if you remember, they finally achieved their goal. They ruled over Ötekin, they ruled over the eastern steppe, they even expanded a little bit, which this map doesn't show yet, and with them other Turkic rulers, also, or other Turkic tribes, also came to power further to the west. New states emerge all the time in the steppe. That is not something exclusive to this part of Turkic history at all. It's interesting, though, that the Oghuz, for example, and we talked about them last time, the Oghuz used to live, like the Western Oghuz used to live in Zungaria. That's basically the gate into the Tarim Basin. You saw that at the last, or one of the prior maps, right? There they are. And now, just like about 20 years later, they appear further to the west. They appear as west as possible on the continent at the border to the Khazar or the Caspian Sea. So that's basically Western Kazakhstan today, right? Or Western Central Kazakhstan. Some have asked me in the last live stream, and also prior to that, how I saw the relationship between the Western Oghuz, like as in the ancestors of the Ottoman, Seljuks, Akkun, Karakum, and so on, between them and the Göktürks. Bilge Khan in his inscription uses the term Oghuz for several things at the same time. And it's like also how he uses Tengri for both the sky and the ruler of the sky, God himself. So it's a bit confusing, but if you read between the lines, it is clear that he sees these Oghuz, these Western Oghuz, so whether simplified, the modern Turkish people descend from, simplified, that they were allied with him, that they were his own people. And the other Oghuz, the Dokuz Oghuz, from which the Uyghurs emerged, he also says they're also kind of like us, but they don't really belong to the core of our people. It's really interesting. I don't think that it's because of the language, the shared language, because the Oghuz Turks, the Western Oghuz, they, well, spoke an Oghuz language. You know, this is one of the 4 or 5 big branches of the Turkic languages. And the Uyghurs also, they spoke, you know, what is classified as, let's say, Karluk-Kimek language. They actually took the Orhon script from the Gökturks and continued using it for a while. So culturally, they were very similar. But again, Bilge Khan says they were not really part of our people. Yours, they were really, these guys, they belong to us. Gökturks fall and the Oghuz flee. Kind of makes sense to me. Maybe they were persecuted. I don't know. Yeah, so that's basically the story of how the second Göktürk Empire fell and why. One of the main reasons being that it had overextended and that what other Turkic peoples were in the way. And yeah, I think just because Kutluk Eltarish and his friends and his sons and brother and so on, they had to fight so much in the beginning, it's something that Bumin didn't have to do. And I'm not taking away anything from Bumin, right? But again, as I said, Bumin basically inherited the Ruran realm. And all of the tribes in this realm immediately accepted his reign. There were no revolts. I'm sure that some of them, many of them maybe, they were even happy that finally, well, a Turk guy is taking over, because most of the people living here were also Turkic. That's why they accepted it. And that's why Bumin, as much as he had to fight, his successors had a much easier game. But yeah, that's a lot of input for now, and I try to summarize it as good as I can. I could have made a normal video about this, of course, but I think kind of doing it live, spontaneous, is a little bit more fun. And the good thing is, I can of course take your questions, and I apologize, you guys have written a lot in the chat, and I think I've ignored most of them. But of course, please, if you have any suggestions or criticism or questions, go ahead, by all means, ask them. Very interesting discussions, by the way, in the chat. I really like that. Even talking about DNA tests and so on. Ah, thank you, Tatiana. Tatiana says my favorite constant video was about Asena, the wolf mother. I remember that video. I think, used my own voice in that. Really cringe when I hear my own voice, but the Asena legend is going to be featured prominently in the Booming Khan movie, which once again I would like to advertise just a little bit today, not too much. And as a reminder, there's a GoFundMe page if you guys want to support my movie project. You can go ahead, but again, it's okay. You don't have to. The fact that you're just here supporting me, and some of you have been supporting me for a long time, is great. What you can definitely do without paying anything, sure, is just to subscribe to my constant blog on Substack, where I write articles. And I know it says that they would be locked, but they're not. All of the articles are for free. And this guy, for example, I just talked about Göktürk generals fighting in the name of the Chinese, right? For the Chinese dynasty. And I've actually written a very long, extensive article about them. One of the most popular being, or most infamous being Ashina Shea. He was even featured in a Chinese historical drama a while ago. So yeah, if you want to know more about these topics, really in depth, go to khanstan.substack.com, subscribe, and whenever I release an art or publish an article, you will get it, you will have it emailed directly to your inbox, so you don't even have to open the website or anything. But yeah, so much for that. Now back to your questions. Someone wrote Wikipedia lies about the Turks. Oh, I know. I know. I'm aware. Yeah, Balaskis 985 is asking, is there any evidence that these tribes were Hungarian Hun Magyar speakers? Not really sure I understand the question. Or like, is the question about tribes being, or like the Hungarians, the Huns being equaling the Magyars? If it's about that, I earned a lot of criticism from last time when I said that the Hunnic language would have died out. And then some Hungarian friends pointed out that Hungarian would be the successor language or the successor culture of the Huns. I know it's very emotional, or like it's a topic dear to the heart, of course, of the Hungarian people. Let me just put it this way: when we open up the map of 560, if you want to know where the Hunnic people used to reside back in the day, this is where. Like the remnants in the western part remained in the Pannonian Basin, and there were also many remnants in the eastern part of the former Hunnic Empire, like the Kutigurs, Utigurs, mentioned the Bulgars, the Saragol. Sabias were not really part of the Hunnic Empire, as far as I know. And there were many more smaller tribes, and they were speaking the Hunnic language. The Onogo were speaking the Hunnic language, and the Magyars were just nearby. But they were not the same people. So again, it kind of figures that when the Magyars or the Hungarians, when they in like the 9th, 10th century, when they arrived in the Pannonian Basin and mixed with the people, with the Huns and others, of course they would also, share DNA ancestry with some Hunnic people, but in general, while the Avars were taking the throne from the Huns and creating a new steppe empire in the middle of Europe, the Magyars were still rather far away. I mean, that's just a fact. Like, I don't want to deny, like, I can't deny that. Yeah. But again, I mean, the Magyars also from the beginning were semi-nomadic steppe people. Some even suggested that they would be Turks, but I wouldn't go that far. Not at all, no. The language is simply different. There are some similarities, but then again, there are more similarities between Finnish and Hungarian than, let's say, between Hungarian and Turkish. There are many loan words, many basic words in the Hungarian language that sound just the same as Turkish words, and some of it was transferred during Ottoman rule in Hungary, but these base words, like I said last time, and when it's about what does mother and father mean in the language, or food like, I don't know, apples, or grass, tree, house, sky, child, adult, grandfather, I don't know, these very basic words that are being formed at the beginning of a developing language. The Magyars certainly did not take that from the Ottomans. But since some of them are exactly sounding exactly the same as a Turkic equivalent, I do think that really the earliest Hungarians, the earliest Magyars living in the Ural Mountains, they were most certainly in contact with Turkic peoples. Yeah, definitely. So that's like the Turkic, how do you say it? That's why some Turkic got into the Hungarian language. But again, it's not the same people. Yeah, that's really interesting, by the way. Tatiana says she has Chuvash relatives, and some of them think they're related to Hunnic people. Well, the Chuvash are also, like, they're living in modern-day Russia, and they're also basically the last remnant of a people really speaking a language that developed out of the old Hunnic language. That really is true. The old Bulgar language, for example, by these guys here, spoken by the Bulgars, it vanished, unfortunately, and the Bulgarian people have been speaking Slavic for a very long time now, but their language was also very similar to that of the Chuvash, because both of them were living in the Hunnic Empire, and both of these peoples were Hunnic. If you want to use Hunnic as an umbrella term, right? We're not talking about the core dynasty of Attila and his family, but as an umbrella term of all the peoples living there. And well, yeah, they shared the language, of course, and some traditions. I don't really know if I would go that far to say that the Huns were Tengris people. There are some attempts at, connecting their spiritual beliefs with those of the definitely Tengris people like Göktürks and so on. But there's just not enough evidence. I think they were more like, I don't want to say primitive shamanists or anything, but they were very animist in their beliefs. And yeah, it was certainly not a monotheistic belief system that they adhered to. There's a very interesting story about the Yuban, while I have the map open. Oh, excuse me. This is the one. You see this here? The Yueban or Yuban. They were actually one of the original Xiongnu people who, the Xiongnu used to rule this part of the steppe, right? They went all the way here to the west, modern day Kazakhstan, pretty much in the middle, in the center. And they stayed there. And the Chinese gave them this name, Yueban or Yuban. And they lovingly used to call them the weak Xiongnu. Why? Because this was part of the Xiongnu people, a subgroup or tribe that had formed that fled from the Chinese after the fall of the Xiongnu Empire. Instead of all taking in all the infighting of the Xiongnu people and the assaults by the Chinese Han Dynasty, they fled. And they arrived near the Yedisu, the Seven River Sea, or Setyesu as it's also called, and they stayed there for a long time. And there's almost no information about the Yuban, but it is known that they also survived until the Göktürk era. And after the fall of the first Göktürk Empire, they just disappear in the sources. They're never mentioned again by anyone. I've always been wondering what kind of people they were. Like, it's called Yuban Kingdom, but I suppose their ancestors were semi-nomadic, most likely speaking some form of Turkic language, but very unusually for a Turkic people, they didn't move. They just stayed where they are. And yeah, that's just super interesting to me. I never got around to going even more in depth regarding the sources, but to the best of my knowledge, there really isn't that much to say about them. There's maybe one interesting story about the Yuban, which you can take it as you want, but involves magic. It's during the time of the Xianbei Empire, which is another steppe entity, right? Which had, after the Xiongnu, had ruled over this part of the steppe and wanted to expand to the west. And they arrived at the Yedisu here in Kazakhstan. And they met the Yuban. And there's a story that was written in a Chinese, Chinese chronicles that says the Yuban, they were not really fighters, but they had magicians, so shamans, I guess. And these magicians actually managed to make the Xianbei army that was approaching turn away and go back and flee and not fight the Yuban. What the magicians did was they conducted some form of ritual, and suddenly a snowstorm and a blizzard appeared. And some of the Xianbei warriors on horseback already on the battlefield suddenly froze. They were iced. Sort of like the ability of Aokiji in One Piece manga. And the Xianbei general was so terrified that in a panic he ordered to retreat. And the Xianbei retreated from this area. Should have been around 155 AD. They retreated and they never came back. And they went back to their Khan, the Xianbei Khan, and told them the story. I'm sure he surely said something like, "Are you guys stupid?" or something. But this was basically the end of the Xianbei expansion. So that's how the Chinese explain how the Yuban, who were not a warrior people anymore, held off the Xianbei from expanding to the west. It's a really funny story if you ask me, and I've always wanted to tell it. I'm not sure if I ever mentioned it in one of my videos, but there you go. Yes, exactly. Thank you, Velasquez. Yeah, the Yuban and their magicians, their shamans, were apparently able to modify the weather. It's not a new topic or trope, of course, throughout history, but it's still very interesting. Like, I've never read anything about the Xiongnu, the Göktürk, the Uyghur, other steppe peoples. I've never read any account in Chinese chronicles of them doing this. You know, like when the Chinese talked about the koskoca Göktürk İmparatorluğu. When I talk about the Göktürks, they never mentioned that they would have used some sort of magic or something. It's always about battlefield. It's always about fighting against steppe warriors, and it's very pragmatic. And yeah, there's no magic involved, except for the Yuban. I guess they really were magicians. Who knows? Yeah, thank you guys. By the way, I've been yapping about a lot of steppe history, and I just wanted to talk about the second Göktürk Empire, but for some reason we arrived at the point of the Yuban using magic against the Xianbei as written in Chinese chronicles. So to bring some order into the chaos, once again, thank you guys for tuning in to a spontaneous live stream of Khan's Den. I told you guys I would do this more often, and every time we meet, every time I meet you guys, and we go into discussions, it makes it even more fun. I just want to show something regarding the Xianbei. It's not my own map, and I apologize that I use Wikipedia out of all, like, yeah. But, you know, because it's very spontaneous. No, you don't need to see these things. This you should see, of course. And yeah, these are the approximate borders of the Xianbei Confederation. As you can see, there used to be the Wusun to the west, but again, the people stopping the Xianbei from advancing, they were the Yuban. And the Yuban are barely mentioned anywhere, as I said. Like, they just existed and did their thing. And again, after the Göktürk era ended and the new, bigger, larger, more interesting, actually, Turkic era really set in, Yuban were no more. I'm pretty sure they mixed with other peoples and then lost their identity. Good night to Dilek, by the way. Thank you for turning in. I'm sorry, I saw your message pretty late. Okay, now it's about... I need to be really careful which words I use. I don't want this video necessarily to get demonetized or, you know, hidden with some sort of copyright strike, which happened last time, by the way, for some strange reason. But it's about the Hazar elite and Judaism, I think. If you guys allow, I would like to interfere a little bit into this discussion, and I gotta use a map for this. I talked about the Hazars in 2 videos. I also showed the second video, or first video, I think last time. I made a video about them in 2023 and again in December 2024, a remade version, which is like a definitive edition now. And the Hazars are a very delicate topic because of the question of Judaism and the relationship of the Hazars with Judaism. And of course, the so-called Hazar hypothesis, which says more or less that, or claims more or less that the Hazars would have, you know, or rather after the fall of the Hazar Empire, that many Jews from this empire and this region would have settled further to the west in Europe, especially Eastern Europe, Northeastern Europe, in the Baltic states or Baltic area, and that would be the reason why, well, Jewish people suddenly appeared in parts of Europe, not just coming in from the south, but also from the east. That's the hypothesis. And what do those people who do not agree with the hypothesis say, first of all, they oftentimes claim that you would be an anti-Semite because you even just mention it. It really happened to me once. Just because I mentioned it, someone called me an anti-Semite, but I hadn't even taken any side yet, right? The second thing they would claim is, well, only the elite of the Hazars converted to Judaism, if at all. There's a third argument or group of lobbyists who even claim that the Hazars would have never existed as a people in general. Well, to them, I can say that's completely wrong, and what you're saying is completely rubbish. The Hazars did exist. Regarding the second thesis or statement, it is not clear if only the Hazar elite converted, or only maybe the ruling Khan at the time, or more people, more commoners, more simple folk, just in general, a larger part of the population. We don't know, and we can't know. What is for sure is, though, that when it comes to DNA analysis, by the way, there's someone saying that I would remove YouTube links to truth or facts of the Turks. I haven't removed anything. I don't even touch anything on the chat, by the way. You can write what you want. Well, but I digress. I apologize. DNA analysis shows that a haplogroup that was shared by the Hazars and that is also shared with a lot of the Jewish population nowadays, or at least of that part which actually takes part in DNA tests, of course, because it's not obligatory, and in some areas it's even banned. They share the same haplogroup as many people in the Caucasus. Why? Well, the Hazars started out in the Caucasus, and in the countries known as Georgia and especially Azerbaijan, that was more or less their home base after the fall of the Göktürk Empire. And then only over time they expanded into modern-day Ukraine. This, Kiev and such, Kherson, that was not the home base of the Hazars. I mean, even the capitals, Atil and Salke, later on, they were to the east of the empire. So this is where they come from. Again, the sources are bleak. But what you can do, of course, is you can create an own theory by assembling as much sources and evidence and chronicles and events as possible. One thing that I did was take a look at what happened after the fall of the Khazar Empire. And I even mentioned it in this video. And, well, you can find out that Jewish people from the Middle East, here, they're called Babylonians, even though Babylon didn't exist like that at the time anymore. But Baghdad took over, basically. It is said that they would travel to the Khazar lands in the Caucasus by the 12th century. Now, the Khazar Empire was destroyed by 985 due to an invasion by the Rus warriors. In the 12th century, like 200 years later, there shouldn't be any Khazars left, right? I mean, of course, people will survive, but they would be scattered and live in a different realm, under a different dynasty, a different people. But for some reason, Jewish pilgrims are making pilgrimages to these former Khazar lands, and I even found a line that claims in the chronology that Kurdish Jewish people from Babylon would have went to the Khazar lands. They would have made, they went on a journey. What happened to them thereafter, I couldn't find out, and the source just abruptly stops, unfortunately. I wish I would have it at hand. I've mentioned it in the video, and when you go to the Khazar video from 2024, there's also a nice source list, so you should find it there. But that was just so strange to me. And there are also European chroniclers, of course, mentioning, like, here, guys living here. They are mentioning that there's a Jewish kingdom in the east, north of the Caucasus, which would be a safe haven for Jewish people. There's a correspondence with, between Jewish high priests. One of them lives in Hazaria, the other one lives in Egypt. And then a second time where they write between Egypt and Syria, or the Levant, Syria, more or less, where they also talk about the Jewish kingdom exactly here in this very territory. It's not being named or called Khazar Khaganate, but it is the Khazar Khaganate, where they also talk about how they would organize, Jewish groups who are being persecuted in other countries to flee there, to migrate there. So there's a lot of evidence for the Hazars at least being a safe haven to people that adhere to Judaism. That's for sure, really. And there are also chronicles that tell that Göktürk, no, but that Hazar Khans converted to Judaism. That's also very likely. And when the first Hazar Khan was called Bulan Khan, and then suddenly Ezekiel appears, it's likely that a conversion happened. Why, if at all, would Hazar Khans, who are descendants of the Ashina Turks, Tengiz people, why would they convert in the first place, maybe? Well, you gotta take a look at the geopolitics. You got the Eastern Romans, the Byzantines, Orthodox Christians, you got the Umayyad and later Abbasid caliphates, Sunni Muslims, and of course you got the pagan or Tengris people, steppe people to the north and the east and the west. And the Eastern Romans and the Umayyads, Abbasids, the Arabs, they really tried to persuade the Hazar rulers from converting to their individual state religion. They're really attempts of Christian missionaries trying to convert certain Hazar Khans to Christianity in order to make them an ally. The Muslims did the same thing, or attempted the same thing, and it just didn't work out. And for some reason, one of the Hazar Khans, was visited by, I think it was two, just they're just being called Jews, so two Jewish people. I don't know if they were acting as priests or something, missionaries, but I mean missionary, and that shouldn't exist in Judaism, of course. But he accepted them at the court in Atil, and for some reason he was convinced that from that point on he should first of all become a Jew by himself. He should convert voluntarily, of course, by himself, which also, if you know about Judaism, shouldn't be that easy actually. But he didn't care, right? He didn't care. And secondly, it's also thought of as a geopolitical decision, because by establishing a realm with a third religion, which does not have an own state anywhere, there's no Jewish state here at the time, not at all. By doing so, the Hazar Khan thought that he would make himself a bit more independent of any foreign religious influence. The ironic thing is, of course, that Judaism was a foreign religion and they were trying to influence them to convert so that the Hazar Khaganate could become a safe haven for the Jewish people. So that's really funny. Like, I never really understood the motivation, but that's how it is. And this happened in the middle of the 8th century. And the Hazar Khaganate existed for more than 100 years still. The rulers still called themselves Khan, even though they were Jewish. That didn't matter that much. And now the big question, of course, is, to close the circle and come back to the original topic, does that make all of these people Jewish people? Most certainly not. But it shouldn't be a surprise, or it wouldn't surprise me if we found some sort of evidence, some sort of script or chronology that would give us some numbers where Jewish people are overrepresented in the Hazar Khaganate in comparison to other countries and regions. So certainly Jewish people from the Middle East went there. I just can't imagine Turkic Tengris people living there, like the common folk, the warriors and the nobles. I can't really imagine them turning to Judaism. Like, I don't think it was really an attractive religion at all. And there are not really that many common, how do you say tenets between Tengrism on the one hand and Judaism on the other hand. So it's really difficult to explain. That's my non-answer. I tried to do it as diplomatically as possible, but yeah. So there's gotta be some secret that we still haven't solved or that is being kept from us. I don't know what is going on. Yes, by the way, Tatiana, I apologize that I didn't reply yet, but yeah, the Adyuge ancestry in the Caucasus, that does point actually to this Hazar connection. Very interesting. Thanks for sharing also with us. So really, there was a lot of things going on. By the way, Levedia, which I have on this map, this was the original homeland, or not the original homeland, but after migrating away from the Ural Mountains, the Magyars arrived in this area. It's called Levedia in the sources, but I think I misplaced them on the map, so please don't take it too serious here. I'm sure it was misplaced. It should be further to the west or southwest. The Magyars, of course, had also a relationship with the Hazars. You saw in the prior map that they used to reside here in the Kazakh steppe, and they migrated slowly and slowly to the west over time. And they were driven off by the Hazars because they didn't accept them anymore from a certain, time on. And there were also Göktürk people arriving in the Hazar Khaganate. The Pechenik, you should have heard of them. And the Pechenik fought against the Hazars. They didn't win, but they continued migrating. And then they fought against the Magyars. And from that point on, the Magyars said, okay, now it's enough. The Hazars don't want to have us anymore. There are even more Turks coming in. They don't want to, they want to settle where we're living currently. We gotta go. And that's when the Magyars actually left for the Balkans and arrived in, southeastern Europe. So that's the story behind the Levedia mark that I put here. Yes, that's an interesting question. Were the first Turkics Caucasoids or Mongoloids? Please answer this question. It doesn't matter how I will answer this question, but there will always be someone offended. But nowadays I just say, that's how it is. Who cares? So I'm going to attempt to answer the question. There are two groups of people when it comes to the origin of the Turkic peoples. There are those who say they came from the east, Transuration theory, for example, and there are those who actually say they come from the west, like in the northern Caucasus. But there's also a third group which is more traditional, and I would join this third group in my arguments, and that is that Turkic culture, the language, emerged on the vicinity or on the frontier between steppe and Siberia. That's where the Turkic peoples, in my estimation, come from. Were they more Caucasoid or Mongoloid? Well, they were just as they used to be later on after they migrated into the West, like the Hunnic people, for example. They were mixed, most certainly. Like, it's also typical nowadays with Siberian people who actually descend from one of the native people of Siberia. They have very interesting Caucasoid features, but also some, I don't like the term Mongoloid, but well, if you want to use it, also some Mongoloid features. And that's, in my estimation, where also the original Turks actually come from. I know it kind of goes against the theory of the Transuration group of Professor Martini Roberts, who I had interviewed a while ago about, like 4 years ago about it. And she claims that Turks and Mongols, Koreans, Japanese, Tungus, they would have all descended from the Amur Basin to the east. Yeah, I respect the theory a lot, but I will stick with a Turkic origin basically in this area. I'm very sure about it. Of course, you could ask, if that's the case, then why did the Göktürks, for example, look so, well, Eastern? Why did they look so Mongoloid? It's because they mixed, of course. They mixed even further. I mean, they were people, like, specifically just talking about the Göktürks, right? They were people living for centuries among other East or Northeast Asian people, and they mixed with them. And if you look at the DNA results of Empress Ashina, for example, which came out a few years ago, it points by, I think, 95% to a northeastern direction, Northeast Asian direction. Yeah, but Mongol people, Tungus people, other people there were also northeast, are classified as Northeast Asian, and that explains the DNA results. But if they descend from the original Turk people from many centuries prior, then they wouldn't have looked that Eastern or Mongolite. I don't know which term to use, which is politically correct. Maybe you guys will know better than me, though. But of course, I accept like any opinion contrary to that. I don't claim to know the truth. It's just my own estimation after everything. Balaskis is asking if they were corn cultivars. Turkish wheat? Wheat? Well, no. They were actually, that's interesting, but this is something that would support the Trans-Eurasian theory. It's that the old ancient Turks actually cultivated in part millet. So they did, no, not invent, but they did cultivate millet farming. It's very interesting, but very sparsely, of course. We're not talking about their time in Siberia, but after they, came to the south. There's an interesting theory that I mentioned in one of the last times, one of the live streams recently, I think. It's about the end of the Ice Age. And you gotta ask yourself, why would people in Siberia in the pre-modern times, if it's so cold, and the entire region, I mean, we're talking about a huge region, if these lands are not very hospitable, it's not easy to live there. You don't have anything in abundance, right? Why are they living there in the first place? Why don't they just leave? And some did, like, as I'm claiming, the ancestors of the Turks, they did leave, but not everyone. And I've noticed in the sources, it kind of makes sense geographically, but everything north of the steppe empires never even attempted to touch. I guess because it's also difficult to navigate this far into the north, but it's still interesting to me. Like, you got a global domination complex, and you want to rule all of the globe as much as possible. And I mean, it's right there. Look, like, the gates are open, right? Like, there's no other entity, no other empire holding you off, or you would have to fight against. Of course, there wasn't that much to gain by conquering these regions. There weren't any cities as far as we know. But I've always also asked myself why peoples in the north barely descended to the south. What happened throughout 10 to 12,000 years ago? The end of the Ice Age, where the ice caps started to melt finally, and where the areas to the north started to become a bit more hospitable again. Well, does that mean then people during the Ice Age, while this was all in frosty, that they went to the north after it got a bit warmer? Or did the people during the Ice Age actually stay here, survive, and some of them left? It would be interesting. Unfortunately, there's not enough archaeological evidence, but it would be interesting to know whether there's a connection between Turkic Siberian people appearing in the steppe and the end of the Ice Age. You know what I'm trying to get at? Because that was 10, 12,000 years ago, and when you go to Wikipedia, it says that the name Turk appeared in 552. Of course, that's true, but the people language didn't appear that late, so that's a fun theory that I've been thinking about a lot recently, and I know it's not that substantial or anything, it's just a fun speculation. But it's quite interesting. And I don't know why, but for some reason, the Göktürks, for example, I've always identified them with... No, they were much larger than you. I've always identified them more with the north than with the east. And I can't really explain it. Like, this is some sort of instinct. I'm not speaking as a historian in that moment. I just have this feeling, like Göktürk even means Eastern Turk to a certain degree. But they, even if they look Eastern, they don't seem Eastern at all. It's really interesting. That's interesting. Someone mentions Siberia is full of huge cities and remnants. Think of Great Tartary. If you guys want to know about the Great Tartary theory, and I've noticed that there's a lot of discussion about this all across social media recently, and even YouTube. I'm not going to go into detail today, but maybe next time. If you guys really want to know about it, if you're gonna want to know what the Tartary theory is saying, and if you want to get to the truth and find out whether it's real or if it's rubbish, we could perhaps do it the next time. I would be interested to know if you guys are interested in this. Okay, we've seen enough maps for today. Let's show some step boys going into action. Yes, the question about the Turkic origin once again. Do you agree that Turkic people come ultimately from a Northeast Asian source originally? No. I think that it's... Well, it depends on what you mean with Northeastern. If you mean Northeast Asia, no. I think it's Northern Asia, actually, like north of Central Asia. But I won't go too much into detail, but it's just my assumption. The Göktürks were the most... You have to keep in mind that the most east the Turks ever went was here. That's the most east that any Turkic entity that we know of ever went. I find it very unlikely that they come from even further to the east. Like from Manchuria or the Amur Basin, actually. And the Göktürks and the Yenisei Kyrgyz, and nowadays we call them the Altai Turks or Altaic people, they were the most eastern Turkic peoples recorded. And all the other groups and tribes are here. And I know that, of course, there was an expansion. I talk about it. I wrote 2 books about the Great Turkic Migration. But again, I do not think that originally the Turks came in from the Far East or Northeast Asia, but rather from North Asia. Maybe in the minority, of course, but I've always been in a minority, whatever I do, so it's okay. Velasquez means maybe we are here after a nuke winter, which then initiated the Ice Age. Yeah, that's the fun theory actually that I had in mind, so probably has no substantial evidence to it at all, but it's still fun to speculate and think about it. Tatiana says, you want to know everything. Well, I suppose you do. I should also show some step girls. You're absolutely right. You want to see some, you know, proud Turkic women here. Traditional Kazakh dress, by the way. Someone says, writes, Turkey comes from the Altai, Alda. It's Altan, actually. Altan, Altanda. Survivors of the last ice age. A culture can still be observed in the magic carpets. Well, yeah. I mean, I think the Altai Mountains would qualify as one of the earliest places to which Turks can be traced back to. I would agree with that, actually. Yeah. Now, I want to show you some of the pictures that I used to implement in my older videos and documentaries, which I never really published, I think, officially. Like, it's not my own work, of course. I'm talking about paintings and well, images that other people made. I just wonder what you're thinking about it. And I'm not really sure where I got all of this. Like on some random Google page or Pinterest maybe. Most of the time I never wrote down the source for this. I think this is supposed to show the Xiongnu Emperor maybe. Yeah, it's one of the images I really liked to use back in the day. Not made by AI, by the way. I mean, there's also Buddha in the back, and I don't know what to think of it. I certainly hope that it's not the Chinese emperor appearing and all of the Xiongnu warriors are paying his respects to him. This is really fun, not funny, it's actually pretty, it's really cute, but I found this picture on, I think, DeviantArt, and it's called Altai Princess. It's interesting. One of my most favorite pictures ever, depicting like ancient Turkic female warriors, which really did exist, is this one. I'm not sure if it's supposed to show Queen Tomiris or just a random Kazakh warrior. But I also frequently used it back in the day. I really remember. I finally started to remember, rather. This one here, I remember from the original source, this one here is supposed to show Xiongnu remnants after the fall of the empire, or like warriors rather, fleeing and asking for refuge in some neighboring area. I don't know about that. Like, take a look at how the people are depicted. Yeah, I don't know. Ah, Nick Malga says, I just explained what a Turk is to my parents because Uzbekistan was playing in the World Cup. Very good. Good job. Let me open up some more interesting. Let me open up some more interesting images or pictures. Ah, I finally have one. Look, I finally have a historical one as well. This is actually, oh, this is supposed to be a Turkic Khan, a Göktürk Khan, Baga Khan, in a battle between Persian Sasanian forces and Göktürk forces in 589. And if you look closely, he was hit by an arrow, and that arrow was fired by Bahram Chobin, who was a Persian general who apparently killed the Khan in battle and then rode further to the north to Sogdia and placed himself on the throne of the Göktürk ruler. And I mean, if you take a look, of course, this is very anachronistic, and the Göktürks don't look like Göktürks at all, but still, it's really interesting. This is one of my favorite pictures, and unfortunately, I don't remember the original painter anymore, but I used this to depict Istemi Khan actually back in the day. Nowadays, it's not really fitting, but yeah, I think it's an upscaled version of the original. Like, you can see if you look closely. It looks really cool though. Cool, yeah, it's very cool. And one more for you guys. This one. This one is the one that I used in the Cave of the Khan blog, because I don't know if I ever told you, but before I started the Khan Stan YouTube channel, I used to have a blog in which I wrote in English and Turkish and German stories, basically about the early Göktürk Empire. And I think I did it like in a like some sort of, how do you say it, novel kind of way, like in a novel narration. And this is one of the pictures that I used as a banner, so it really has nostalgic meaning to me. Thank you Tatiana, bye bye. Thank you for joining once again. Sen de kendine iyi bak. Afiyet olsun. And thanks again actually for all of you who joined on this spontaneous live stream. It's really fun to share these things with you guys, but for the next time I'm also gonna prepare something more specific. Let me know in the comments below also, once this live stream gets converted into a video. Let me know in the comment section which topic you want me to talk about or you want to discuss with me next time, so I can prepare a bit more. Again, the movie, the Göktürk movie, Booming Khan, I used to call it Booming's Destiny until a while ago, is still in the works, and I'm doing my best to get it done as soon as possible. I'm thankful for all the donations. I'm thankful for all the likes on YouTube. I'm thankful for you guys watching. And thanks again for joining. Have a good night, a good day. Enjoy the World Cup. If you watch football, I'm more of a basketball fan anyway. But still, enjoy your time. And I will see you guys next weekend. Until then, bye bye.